My name is Sarah Bennett, and before I ever held a loaf of bread, I held a foreclosure notice. I was 32 when my life cracked open. One eviction, one divorce, one world collapsing in a single week. I had worked for 12 years at a small restaurant in Denver. It was nothing fancy, but it was steady, until one night the owner shut the doors without warning. No severance, no pay, just a "we're closed" note taped to the window. I went home that evening to an empty apartment. My husband had already packed and left a note of his own. "I can't do this anymore." The silence that followed was louder than anything I'd ever heard. Within a month, I was out of savings. The bank took the apartment. I sold my furniture, then my TV, then even the old stand mixer I used to bake on weekends. Everything went, except a few recipes my grandmother had written in her soft, curly handwriting. The night I became homeless, the air smelled of rain. I sat inside my car, parked beside a closed supermarket, my head resting against the steering wheel. People walked by. No one looked twice. That's when I took out that old recipe notebook and read the first line. Love is the first ingredient. Without it, nothing will rise. I laughed through tears. It felt absurd. Love? I had none left. But something in me refused to let go. I thought, if I could just make something, even a single loaf, maybe I'd feel alive again. The next morning, I traded my last $20 for flour, sugar, and yeast. I borrowed an oven from the diner across the street, where an old friend still worked. The smell of warm bread filled the air. I sold 3 loaves that day out of a cardboard box, standing in the cold. It wasn't much, but when I handed the first loaf to a customer who smiled and said, "This tastes like home," something rose inside me, something that hadn't in years. For months, my car became my home. The back seat was my bed, a folded blanket, a small cooler, a box of ingredients. That was everything I owned. Every dawn, I woke before sunrise. I washed my face in a gas station restroom, tied my hair, and went to borrow that same oven. I baked quietly, sometimes humming the same lullaby my mother used to sing when I was little. The city was kind in small ways. A janitor let me plug in my phone once. A coffee shop owner gave me leftover milk. Even strangers bought bread just to give me a few extra dollars. But the nights were long, cold, lonely, and filled with doubt. There were times I wanted to stop. One evening, the police knocked on my car window and told me to move. I drove to a church parking lot and sat there for hours, staring at the moon, wondering if anyone would even notice if I disappeared. Then one day, something small but life-changing happened. A woman named Linda Carter bought a loaf of my bread at the corner near her office. She came back the next day and the next. On the 4th day, she asked, "Would you make 20 loaves for our community event?" I said yes, even though I had no kitchen, no supplies, no clue how I'd do it. I baked all night, my hands shaking, praying the oven wouldn't die on me. At sunrise, I packed the warm loaves into boxes and delivered them to Linda's event. The next weeks moved fast. Linda introduced me to a small business counselor. They helped me apply for a local startup grant. It wasn't much, just enough to rent a tiny kitchen space in an old warehouse district. The walls were cracked, the oven older than me, but it was mine. I called it Rise Again Bakery. Every day started at 4 a.m. I'd mix dough, let it rest, shape each loaf by hand. The smell of yeast and butter became my new sunrise. I started selling at farmers markets. People didn't just buy bread, they stayed to talk, to share their stories. There was a man who said my sourdough reminded him of his late wife's recipe. A young woman who whispered she hadn't tasted homemade bread since her mother passed away. I realized I wasn't just selling bread, I was selling memories. Within a year, I had a small team, 2 part-time helpers and 1 delivery driver. They were people like me, once lost, now trying to start again. But success didn't erase the pain. I still slept light, worried the business would crumble. Bills piled up, ovens broke down. There were nights I sat on the bakery floor, covered in flour and fear, whispering, "Please, not again." And yet, every morning, I'd stand, wipe my tears, and bake. Because that's what hope does. It rises, no matter how many times you knead it down. It's been 6 years since that first night in the car. Rise Again Bakery now has a small storefront on 8th Avenue. The window reads, "Bread, coffee, hope." Every morning before the sun comes up, I unlock the door, light the oven, and breathe in that same warm air that once saved me. Linda still visits. So do the police officers who once told me to move my car. They buy muffins now and ask about the specials. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. Sometimes young women walk in, shy, quiet, eyes tired the way mine once were. They tell me they've been struggling, sleeping on couches, searching for work. I give them bread and tell them, start with something small. Start with what you love. I've learned that success isn't measured by how much you have, but by how much you can give back. Every loaf that leaves my bakery carries a piece of that lesson, a reminder that even broken dough can rise if you give it warmth, time, and a little faith. I still keep that old notebook, the one my grandmother wrote. The ink is faded, pages stained with flour and tears. On the very last page, she wrote, "Someday, someone will taste your story and feel less alone." And now, every time someone takes a bite and smiles, I know she was right.